All right, our text for this evening comes to us from Job chapter 42, verses 1 through 6 and 10 through 17. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. You ask, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I, and I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. You said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said. I sit in the dust and ashes to show my repentance. When Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes. In fact, the Lord gave him twice as much as before. Then all his brothers, sisters, and former friends came and feasted with him in his home. And they consoled him and comforted him because of all the trials the Lord had brought against him. And each of them brought him a gift of money and a gold ring. So the Lord blessed Job in the second half of his life, even more than in the beginning. For now he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 teams of oxen, 1,000 female donkeys. He also gave Job 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. He named his first daughter Jemiah, the second Keziah, and the third Keren-Happuch. In all the land, no women were as lovely as the daughter of Job's, and their father put them into his will along with their brothers. Job lived 140 years after that, living to see 4 generations of his children and grandchildren, and then he died, an old man who had lived a long and full life. So tonight we're wrapping up our 4-part series on Job. So what do we do when the ending of a story feels more like a fairy tale than real life? We have to dig deeper, don't we? Especially in this text, because the whole story of Job is about not settling for pat and easy answers or short answers. This book has been about complexity, the complexities of life and faith. And so we just can't end our time in Job by shouting, yay, everything's restored. Because the truth is far more complicated than that, isn't it? Everything was not restored. You can't take back time. You can't replace people. There were real losses here. Things that couldn't be replaced, things that couldn't be forgotten. This whole experience, it left some scars. Do you have any scars? The first scar I can remember receiving, I got from the bathtub. No, really, I was little, and one of my favorite things to do was slide off the back of the bathtub down into the water, and one day I did it with so much gusto that I slammed into the faucet and put a big gash on the bridge of my nose. Then there's a scar underneath my chin from the time I fell out of a chair. As you can see, grace is really not one of my gifts in life. I still have faint burn lines on my arms that I got on the fryers from McDonald's in high school and college for my job. I've got a scar on my leg from a bad run-in with a coral reef while snorkeling, and another scar on my foot from another run-in with a reef when I finally did my bucket list item of learning how to surf. And those scars are visible. Each of them has this story behind them, but I have invisible scars too. You know the ones I'm talking about, the broken relationships, the health issues, the pain, the grief of lost loved ones, the things I wish I could take back. And then there's the scars left by that nagging feeling deep down inside that I'm just never going to be good enough. And those are just a few of my invisible scars. And they all have their stories too. And these invisible scars, they're just as real as the invisible ones. In fact, I would say that they're the most life-altering scars because they leave a mark on my life and my health and my trust. Sure, time can be a great healer of wounds, as well as modern medicine, prayer, physical therapy, and let's be real honest, going to see a therapist. But even when you and I heal, the scars, they remain, and we remember how they got there. And I say all this to say that every human being here listening to this text talk and online later knows better than to think that the scars from Job's horrible life experience just somehow disappeared. And there is this perfect happy ending scene at the closing of the book. Before this happy ending, Job had lost all of his children, his wealth, his personal health. He had also experienced a deep strain in all of his important relationships. Job had scars. And maybe we can't see most of them at the end of this story, but I guarantee you they would have been there. And perhaps he even had wounds that were still healing. I mean, how could Job not still have times with overwhelming waves of grief come crashing over him? Times where he thought about the children that he lost, when it was their birthday, when he saw something they would have really loved, when he couldn't share something with them that he knew they would have giggled at. Of course, Job would have felt those losses. No number of new children can replace children that are lost. And yes, Job's wealth and health were restored, but that doesn't mean he didn't remember what it was like to try and get by, or that he had forgotten about all of the stress and strain that had caused to his marriage. Job had literally been scraping the sores on his body with a potsherd, which means that even Job's physical body bore visible scars and reminders of the ordeal that he went through. And Job's friends, do you remember them? Woo! I mean, how long did it take before Job trusted them again? How long did it take for him to believe that if they disagreed about something in regards to faith or God, that his friends would respect a difference in opinion? You don't just forget that. You don't just pick up and move on without having to do that real hard work of relational healing. Of course, Job would have to rebuild his trust with the people that we see gathered around this table in the closing scene of the story of Job. And we have to remember that a lot of time passed between Job's encounter with God in the whirlwind and this closing scene around the table. This scene that pans out even wider, the view of the happiness of Job, we have to remember it's experienced later on in life. 10 more children. That takes time. Yes, at first glance, the ending of the book of Job can look like Job gets a huge upgrade in wealth and family due to his faithfulness. Except we know better, because Job didn't just receive those things because he was faithful, because that plays into that whole retributive justice belief that the whole book of Job is disputing. Over the last several weeks, we learned that bad things happen to good people, even people of faith. Job hadn't been unscathed by the hardships he had experienced in the story. He had scars, both visible and invisible. His receiving double back what he had lost didn't remove those scars. It didn't replace what he had lost. Didn't magically heal the pain, the grief, or the strained relationships in his life. That was going to take time. And the scars and the stories behind them, they would remain. Job had been through it. But I also have to imagine that after his experience, Job was seeing things clearer than he had ever seen them before. Job's profound experience in the whirlwind had given him a new perspective. Our text says that Job had heard about God by the hearing of the ear, meaning that, like us, Job knew about God from what others had taught him, from what he had learned about God from his family and his friends and his religious community. But by the end of this story, Job is able to say that his eye has seen God. Job had had a personal encounter with the holy, and it had changed him. It drew him into a close, intimate relationship with God, and it helped him to trust God even more. Job now knew that this life in this beautiful, broken world, it was complex, that it would be filled with both beauty and pain, and he had the scars to prove that. But you know what Job was also sure of was that God was the one who was working to bring order to chaos, the one who was working to bring life instead of death, that it was God who was the one who was working towards the flourishing of all creation. And I think this new understanding gave Job a little bit of hope for the future. The picture we see at the end of Job is almost like a time lapse. We see Job regaining his friends' support as they share a meal, the return of Job's wealth and family. He and his wife blessed with 10 more children. And in fact, Job feels so blessed and free from the cultural norms of his society that he extravagantly blesses his daughters with their own inheritance too, which would have been unheard of. But I think if we could zoom back in, like way in, we could still see the scars on Job's body from the time that he had to scrape his sores with a potsherd. And if we had a way to see the invisible scars, we would see the wounds of his losses and hardships, probably mostly healed. But the scars would still have been there, along with the memories of how we got them. And I would guess that because of that, Job savored and cherished the latter days of his life more than he had before he had experienced these great trials. Because those scars, they reminded him to hold his loved ones just a little bit tighter, to bless others abundantly, to appreciate times of good health. Those scars also reminded him of his own wrong-headed beliefs about God, which probably helped him to be a little humbler when he disagreed with others about matters of faith. And all of those scars and all of the memories attached to them, I bet they helped Job live his life in a whole new way. He could never get his old life back, but all those experiences, they had given him gratitude for the blessings that he was experiencing that day. When the chaos ceased, when Job's life was restored, Job knew who to thank for that. The scars, they remained, but Job's gratitude for the days and the good years and the blessings from God, they grew. So may God give you and I eyes to see where every blessing in our life comes from. And may the wounds and scars from our past give us a deep gratitude for the blessings of today. Amen. Molly. It's all right. She's writing. Yes, I can. No problem. I always forget it blocks it.
Can you hear me okay? I can't really tell, but if you can, that's good. Okay. So this year I had foot surgery. A tiny part of my big toe was fractured, and I would need surgery for that. And during my recovery after the surgery, I had tremendous pain in my heel while I was propping my foot up while I still had the splint on. When I got the splint removed, it revealed a huge, deep tissue wound and pressure sore in my heel. No wonder I was in so much pain and crying myself to sleep. I had previously been on bed rest for 2 weeks and would start the long process of improper care for my pressure ulcer because I was not referred to a wound specialist until a lot later down the road. So much of my summer was lying around or traveling with restricted mobility, pain, constant care of my foot, and especially for this open wound. Many times over the summer while I was away from home, I relied on others to take care of me and my health. Before surgery, I was in pain and had issues with my right foot, but once I was in the splint, I was completely at a loss of my whole leg. Once the wound was introduced and finally properly acknowledged, and the seriousness of my state of being in health was addressed, we found out that this heel complication was and is still dragging out my recovery and prolonging the loss of the ability to use my foot like I used to. I'm a dance major. I feel that my whole being and purpose is to dance, teach, and allow others to connect with the movement of our bodies. This summer, I learned how to dance in a chair and perform chair dances. These restrictions allow for the upper body to be expressive and emotive for the audience to experience. I've been learning how to be proud and patient of myself for taking care of my body through slow recovery while I watch my colleagues dance throughout this semester. I'm grateful for a body that can move, dance, and heal. Then in October, I had laryngitis, and I experienced what a week at KU was like without the ability to verbally communicate. And in these moments of losing big parts of myself, mobility, and the ability to speak, I think about people who do not have this ability and still continue to live fulfilling lives. This has furthered my interest in advocating for accessibility, especially in the confined views in the world of dance.